You're standing in the shadows of a crumbling medieval castle in the year 1301, and you hear something that chills your very soul, muffled screams echoing from beneath the stone floors, growing weaker by the day until they finally fade into an eternal silence that will haunt these halls for centuries. What you're witnessing is one of the most horrific acts of betrayal in royal history, the deliberate entombment of a living princess by the very man who was supposed to protect her. Before diving into this forgotten tale of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. What you're about to hear isn't just another medieval horror story. It's the true account of how absolute power can transform love into obsession, protection into imprisonment, and a human being into a living sacrifice to one man's twisted vision of honor. The name Princess Constance of Aragon might not be familiar to you, but her story will linger in your thoughts long after you finish listening. Let's start with the man who would become the architect of this nightmare, King Frederick III of Sicily. He wasn't born a monster. In fact, his early years showed remarkable promise as a ruler who genuinely seemed to care about his subjects. When he inherited the throne at just 18 years old, many believed they were witnessing the rise of a truly great medieval king. He implemented fair taxation, supported the arts, and even showed unusual mercy toward political prisoners. But power has a way of revealing the darkest corners of the human soul. By 1299, something fundamental had shifted inside Frederick's mind. Maybe it was the constant pressure of defending his kingdom against papal armies. Maybe it was the isolation that comes with absolute authority over the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. Or maybe it was what happened to the one person he claimed to cherish above all others, his daughter, Princess Constance. Constance was everything a medieval princess was expected to be and more. Born in 1282, she possessed not only the striking beauty that ran in the Aragonese bloodline, but also a sharp intelligence that impressed even the most learned scholars at court. She spoke 4 languages fluently, could debate theology with bishops, and had mastered the complex art of medieval diplomacy before her 15th birthday. But perhaps most remarkably, she had inherited her father's fierce independence and unwavering sense of justice. When Frederick first laid eyes on his newborn daughter, court chroniclers describe a moment of transformation that would define both their destinies. The battle-hardened king, who had shown little emotion even during the most brutal military campaigns, reportedly wept as he held the infant princess. From that moment forward, Constance became not just his daughter but his obsession, the living embodiment of everything pure and precious in his increasingly dark world. The early years of their relationship were marked by an almost supernatural closeness that both fascinated and disturbed the royal court. Frederick would spend hours teaching Constance about statecraft, military strategy, and the harsh realities of medieval politics. Unlike other royal fathers who viewed daughters as mere bargaining chips for marriage alliances, Frederick seemed to genuinely value Constance's opinions and insights. She became his closest advisor, the only person in the kingdom who could speak truthfully to the king without fear of retribution. But this extraordinary bond between father and daughter began to take on increasingly troubling dimensions as Constance matured into a young woman. Frederick's protective instincts evolved into something far more sinister, a possessive need to control every aspect of her existence. He began monitoring her conversations with courtiers, screening her correspondence, and gradually isolating her from potential romantic interests. By 1298, when Constance turned 16, the marriage proposals began flooding in from across Europe. Kings, princes, and powerful nobles all sought to ally themselves with Frederick's growing power through union with his remarkable daughter. Each proposal sent the king into deeper spirals of rage and paranoia. He saw these suitors not as potential allies, but as thieves attempting to steal his most precious possession. The turning point came when Prince Alfonso of Portugal arrived at the Sicilian court in the spring of 1300. Unlike the other suitors who had approached Frederick through diplomatic channels, Alfonso came bearing impressive military credentials and genuine affection for Constance. He was handsome, intelligent, and shared many of her intellectual interests. Most dangerously for Frederick, Constance seemed to genuinely reciprocate Alfonso's feelings. Palace observers noted the immediate chemistry between the young couple during Alfonso's visit. They would walk together in the gardens, engage in animated discussions about literature and philosophy, and share glances that spoke of developing genuine affection. For the first time in her life, Constance appeared to have found someone who could match her intellectually and emotionally, someone who saw her as more than just the king's daughter. Frederick's reaction to this blossoming romance was swift and brutal. Within days of noticing his daughter's obvious attraction to Alfonso, the king ordered the Portuguese prince's immediate departure from Sicily. The official reason given was a supposed insult to Sicilian honor, but court insiders knew the truth. Frederick could not bear the thought of losing Constance to another man, even one who would elevate Sicily's status through marriage alliance. But Alfonso's departure only intensified the connection between him and Constance. Secret letters began passing between Sicily and Portugal, carried by merchants and pilgrims who had no idea they were facilitating a romance that would ultimately lead to tragedy. These letters, later discovered hidden in the walls of Constance's chambers, reveal a young woman desperately in love and increasingly frustrated with her father's suffocating control. In one particularly poignant letter, Constance wrote to Alfonso, "My dearest prince, each day that passes without your presence feels like a year of winter. My father's love has become a prison more secure than any dungeon, and I fear I shall never know the freedom that other women take for granted. Yet my heart remains yours, no matter what barriers may be placed between us." Alfonso's responses were equally passionate and increasingly desperate. He proposed elaborate plans for Constance to escape Sicily, offered to wage war against Frederick if necessary, and even suggested they meet secretly in neutral territory to be married by sympathetic clergy. Each letter pushed the boundaries of what medieval propriety allowed, but also demonstrated the depth of feeling between the young couple. Frederick's network of spies eventually intercepted several of these letters, and what he read there destroyed whatever remained of his paternal love. The king who had once wept at his daughter's birth now saw her as a traitor who had betrayed not only her family, but her very kingdom through her romantic attachment to a foreign prince. The confrontation between Frederick and Constance that followed would be remembered as one of the most chilling exchanges in medieval royal history. Palace guards who witnessed the scene described a father transformed into something barely recognizable as human, his face contorted with a rage that seemed to emanate from the depths of hell itself. Frederick burst into Constance's private chambers without warning, clutching the intercepted letters in his trembling hands. The princess, who had been reading by candlelight, looked up to see her father's eyes blazing with a fury she had never witnessed before. For a moment, neither spoke, the silence heavy with the weight of betrayal and broken trust. When Frederick finally found his voice, his words cut through the air like a blade. "So this is how my beloved daughter repays the love and protection I have given her," he hissed, throwing the letters at her feet. "Consorting with foreign enemies, planning to abandon her family and her kingdom for the fleeting pleasures of romance." Constance, despite her terror, maintained the dignity that had always marked her character. She rose slowly from her chair, her chin lifted in defiance that mirrored her father's own stubborn nature. "I have done nothing wrong," she replied, her voice steady despite the fear that must have been coursing through her veins. "Alfonso is an honorable man who would bring strength to our kingdom through marriage. My feelings for him are pure and honest." But Frederick was beyond reason. In his twisted mind, Constance's love for another man represented the ultimate betrayal, not just of him personally, but of everything he believed a daughter owed her father. The king, who had once praised her intelligence, now saw that same sharp mind as a weapon turned against him. What followed was a systematic campaign of psychological warfare designed to break Constance's spirit and force her to renounce her feelings for Alfonso. Frederick confined her to increasingly smaller quarters within the castle, gradually stripping away her privileges and freedoms. Her books were removed, her correspondence banned, and her trusted servants replaced with guards whose loyalty belonged entirely to the king. But perhaps most cruelly, Frederick began a series of daily interrogations where he would demand that Constance confess her sins and beg forgiveness for her treachery. These sessions, conducted in the castle's great hall before assembled courtiers, were designed to humiliate the princess into submission. Frederick would force her to stand for hours while he recited her crimes against family and kingdom, demanding responses that never came. Constance's refusal to break under this psychological torture only fueled her father's rage. She maintained her dignity throughout these ordeals, never once begging for mercy or renouncing her love for Alfonso. Her strength in the face of such cruelty impressed even Frederick's most loyal supporters, many of whom began to question their king's sanity. As weeks turned into months, Frederick's behavior became increasingly erratic and unpredictable. He would spend hours pacing the castle corridors, muttering about betrayal and ingratitude. Palace staff reported finding him in Constance's former chambers, staring at her childhood belongings and alternating between tears and violent outbursts. The king's descent into madness reached a new depth when he began consulting with the castle's chaplain about biblical precedents for dealing with disobedient children. He became obsessed with stories of fathers who had made ultimate sacrifices to preserve their honor, and began speaking ominously about the need for decisive action to prevent further contamination of the royal bloodline. It was during this period that Frederick conceived the horrific plan that would define his legacy of cruelty. If Constance would not voluntarily abandon her treacherous love, then she would be permanently prevented from acting upon it. The king commissioned his master builder to begin secret construction of what would become his daughter's living tomb. The chamber was designed with meticulous attention to the princess's prolonged suffering. Located deep beneath the castle's main keep, it was carved from solid rock with walls thick enough to muffle any sound. The space was just large enough for a person to stand or lie down, but not wide enough to pace or move freely. A small opening at the top would allow minimal air circulation, enough to sustain life for weeks or possibly months, but not enough to provide any real comfort. Frederick personally oversaw every detail of the construction, making adjustments to ensure maximum psychological impact. He ordered the installation of a narrow slot through which food and water could be passed, but positioned it so that anyone confined within would have to crawl on hands and knees to reach it. The floor was left as bare stone, cold and unforgiving, designed to make rest impossible. The construction was completed in the winter of 1301, and on a bitter February night, Frederick's guards dragged the struggling princess from her chambers down the winding stone steps to her underground prison. Constance's final words, according to the single guard who later confessed on his deathbed, were not pleas for mercy, but a defiant declaration that love would triumph over her father's hatred, even in death. For 17 agonizing days, palace servants reported hearing faint sounds echoing from beneath the castle floors. The princess, who had once debated theology with bishops, now spent her final hours singing hymns and reciting prayers, her voice growing weaker as starvation and dehydration slowly claimed her life. By the 18th day, the sounds had ceased entirely, and Sicily's most brilliant princess had become another casualty of absolute power, corrupted beyond recognition. Frederick never spoke of his daughter again, but palace observers noted that he aged decades in the months following her death. The king who had once shown such promise became a paranoid recluse, haunted by visions of Constance and dying alone just 3 years later, his kingdom in ruins around him. When Alfonso of Portugal learned of Constance's fate, he took a vow of celibacy and spent the remainder of his life funding the construction of hospitals and orphanages across Europe, declaring that he would honor her memory through acts of compassion that stood in stark contrast to her father's cruelty. The chamber where Princess Constance died was discovered during castle renovations in 1847, her skeletal remains still wearing the simple white dress she had been buried in. Carved into the stone wall with her fingernails were the words, Amor vincit omnia, love conquers all, a final testament to the human spirit's refusal to surrender even in the face of ultimate betrayal. Today, historians debate whether Frederick's actions stemmed from genuine madness or calculated political maneuvering, but the truth matters less than the lesson his story provides. Absolute power, when combined with possessive love and wounded pride, can transform even the most promising ruler into a monster capable of destroying everything he claims to protect. Princess Constance's story serves as a haunting reminder that the greatest tragedies often occur not between enemies, but within families where love becomes twisted into something unrecognizable and deadly. Her courage in the face of impossible circumstances, her refusal to betray her own heart even when faced with death, and her final act of defiance carved into cold stone represent the enduring power of human dignity against tyranny. The castle where these events unfolded still stands today, its underground chamber sealed but not forgotten. Visitors report feeling an inexplicable sadness when walking through the halls where a father's love became a daughter's death sentence, where protection became imprisonment, and where a princess's greatest crime was daring to love someone other than the man who gave her life. Princess Constance of Aragon died as she had lived, with dignity, courage, and an unshakable belief in the power of true love to transcend even the grave. Her story reminds us that some betrayals cut so deep they echo through centuries, and that the human capacity for both cruelty and resilience knows no bounds.